Hi, welcome back to the 10-Minute Movie Channel. Today we will be talking about a 2006 movie with the theme of struggle, drama, family, called The Pursuit of Happyness. So, sit back, relax, and stay safe. The movie opens in 1981 in San Francisco. Chris Gardner, a salesman who sells portable bone density scanners for a living. Every morning he takes his son, Christopher Jr., to daycare, and then visits various hospitals in the city to sell the scanners, but no one is interested because they are unnecessary and also expensive. Therefore, he asks his wife, Linda, to pick up his son from daycare, but Linda cannot do it now because she works a double shift. On the other hand, Chris shared that he had to sell at least 2 scanners per month, one for the rent of the house and daycare, and 1 scanner to redeem his car that was towed by the police, but now Chris had trouble selling it for a while. That night during dinner, Chris saw a Rubik's Cube, which was a new toy at that time. Linda asked him if he had paid the tax, but Chris replied he would file an extension. Hearing that, Linda became frustrated and left for her shift. That night Chris tried to solve the Rubik's Cube, and was able to do it easily. The next morning as Chris was walking, he saw a man getting out of his sports car. Chris asked him, "What does he do for a living?" And the man replied that he was a stockbroker. Chris thought that he might have to go to college to get the job, but the man said it was not necessary, but Chris had to be good at numbers and calculations. Chris finds everyone around him happy, so he questions himself why he doesn't look like that. The next morning, he tells Linda that he will be late getting home that night, as he will be stopping at the office to apply as a stockbroker. Linda finds him ridiculous and demeaning. She doesn't like it and tells him to never talk to her like that. They have an argument and Linda reminds him that they have to pay rent for 2 months. Chris heads to the brokerage company to apply. He leaves the scanner with a street singer girl, because he doesn't want to go inside while carrying it. He goes into the office and as he applies for the job, Chris sees the girl running away with his scanner, causing him to immediately chase after her after taking the application form. He chases after her but the girl escapes by taking the train. Chris hears that the brokerage company needs 20 people every 6 months, but only 1 gets the job. The next morning, Chris promised Linda that he would sell the scanner, so that Linda would not see it again. Chris meets Dean Witter-Reynolds, with a completed application form, and personally delivers it to the head of the company, Jay Twistle. Chris tried to brief herself, but Jay was in a hurry, so she accepted Chris's form and said she would call him. Suddenly Chris saw the tempo girl and her partner, carrying her scanner, so she angrily chased after them. Then Chris told them that she had spent all her savings to buy the scanner, which she called a revolutionary machine, but didn't realize that doctors and hospitals would consider it an unnecessary luxury. For Chris, losing the scanner was like losing 1 month's groceries. After chasing after them, she finally got the scanner back. His son then reminded him of his earlier promise that he would get rid of the scanner before going home, but he brought it all back that night. Linda saw him bring back both scanners, and she was disappointed. The next day, Chris met Jay at the office. Chris told him about the application form she sent in a week ago. But Jay told her that she had to go somewhere first. Luckily, Jay told her that he was also going to the same place, so they both took a taxi together. On the way, Jay focuses on solving the Rubik's Cube while Chris talks about his skills and personality. Jay has trouble solving the Rubik's Cube, but Chris says he can solve it, and Jay doesn't believe him. Finally, Chris manages to solve the cube before Jay gets off and impresses him, but he soon leaves Chris, and now he has to pay his taxi fare. She gets out of the car and runs away, but the taxi driver chases her. She runs to the train station and gets on the train, but the train doors close on her hand, causing her to have to leave her scanner behind. Chris calls Linda to apologize for not being able to get home on time, making Linda angry that she missed her shift. Linda tells him that she's leaving, and she'll bring her son. Hearing that, Chris rushes back to his house and finds his wife and son gone. Just then he gets a call from Jay, who tells Chris to write down his secretary's number, so they can talk tomorrow. But Chris can't find any pen or paper nearby, so Chris remembers the number and goes to a nearby store to write it down on paper. The next morning, Chris met Linda at their daycare center. Linda tells him that she is no longer happy with him. Hearing that, Chris tells her to go and be happy, but their son will stay with her. That night the landlord asked Chris for the rent, but Chris asked for more time, but he told Chris to vacate in the morning, when the renovation workers came. Chris then promised to pay him immediately, and he would also paint it himself, and the landlord agreed to let him stay for 1 week. The next day while painting the walls, 2 policemen arrived at the house, and took Chris to the station where it was suspected that he had not paid all his train tickets. The police officers told him that they would verify it at 9:30 a.m. But Chris told them that he had an interview scheduled at that time, but they ordered him to stay until the process was completed. Having no other choice, Chris called Linda to look after their son until he arrived. Chris stays the night at the station, and the next morning he shows up for the interview in his shabby clothes. He arrives at Dean Wither's office on time, but he is clearly disappointed with his appearance. Chris tells him that he was arrested for allegedly not paying the ticket. Despite his appearance, he manages to impress the interviewers and manages to make them laugh. Later, Jay comes to congratulate him, but Chris says he will think about the job, since he is only an intern and has no salary. However, Chris begins to think about changing, and eventually continues with the process. Chris heads to his house and waits for his son, then his wife arrives shortly after. Linda told him that she was moving to New York, because her sister's boyfriend was opening a restaurant, and she might have a job there. Chris wanted to keep his son. He then told her about the internship, which made Linda upset, and left in tears. The next day, Chris and his son moved to a nearby motel, then they went to the hospital to sell the scanner, and a doctor agreed to buy it. It could give him some relief, because the money would keep him afloat for a few days. The next day, Chris went to work to learn about the trade. During his lunch break, Chris runs into Martin Frome while walking, and while they are having a general conversation, Chris suddenly sees that someone is carrying the scanner he left at the train station. Chris then chases after the man, but he gets hit by a car on his way, and he loses his shoe. He returns to the office with the missing shoe. Over the next few days, he continues to help the office manager, Alan Frakesh, and tries to get clients, but to no avail. Chris had to pick up her son early, and had to get her work done in less time, so she wouldn't hang up the phone to look for clients. She didn't even drink water, so she wouldn't have to waste time in the bathroom. Something finally happened, when the top pension fund manager, Walter Ribbon, gave her an appointment and told Chris to come to his office. That evening, as she and her son dine at a restaurant, Chris tells him that she will take him away with her this weekend, as she needs to visit some offices. The next morning, Chris went to Walter Ribbon's house, where he thanked him for the chance meeting. After the meeting was over, Walter Ribbon intended to go to a soccer match, and he invited Chris and Christopher to come along. During the game, Chris asks him to let Dean Wither manage his funds, but Ribbon tells Chris that he likes him, but there is no chance he will accept Chris' offer. Because of his hard work, he slowly began to accumulate money. But one day, the IRS took some money from Chris's bank account, as payment for his unpaid taxes. He was broke because he only had $22 in his bank account. Chris then asked his friend who owed him money, but his friend thought it was paid, because he helped them move to a motel. Chris was getting frustrated, but his friend soon closed the door. Later that day, Chris took his son to the park there, but he saw a man carrying his scanner, so Chris ran towards him and finally picked it up. He cleaned it well and went to sell it. A doctor agreed to buy it, but the scanner was not working. The doctor still wanted to buy it but asked Chris to fix it. That night they went to the motel to look for their things. Outside the room, Chris tried to open the door, but the lock had changed. The next day, Chris and his son went to a homeless shelter, but were turned away because the place was only for women and children. They headed to another homeless shelter. There they were almost cut off, when a man cut in and stole Chris's place. Luckily the security guard found out that the person in front of them was cheating, so Chris got a room inside the homeless shelter. Chris tries to fix the scanner and studies for the apprenticeship exam. On the day of the exam, Chris manages to finish it quickly. As he is about to go looking for money, he meets Frome, who just got out of the taxi, and asks Chris to lend him money. Chris lent him $5 anyway, even though he was almost out of money. That night Chris and his son sleep on the train, and the next day Chris donates blood to earn money, and uses it to buy parts for his scanner. They get to a homeless shelter, and Chris ends up fixing the scanner. He then goes to the doctor, and ends up selling his last scanner, which makes enough money to survive for 4 weeks. On the last day of the internship, he meets Jay in the restroom. Jay congratulates Chris for bringing in many clients to this company. He tells Chris that he has done an amazing job. Next, Chris is called by Alan Frakesh. He leads Chris to Frome's room, who notices Chris is wearing a nice shirt today. Chris explained that he thought it was appropriate to dress like this for an event on his last day. Frome smiled and said he should wear one tomorrow, as tomorrow would be his first day of work. Frome happily welcomed him to the company, while Chris struggled to hold back his tears. Chris then thanked Paramitra. Frome gives him the money he borrowed, and Chris then goes outside the building and tells him that this part of his life is called happiness. He then immediately picks up his son at daycare, and hugs him tightly. The two of them walk out together, and the epilogue reveals that Chris went on to form his own brokerage firm, which is worth millions of dollars, and made another $1 million by selling his minority stake in the firm, which is how the movie ends.